In every hypothesis test that we do, we're going to have to make some decisions. And there are really only two decisions that you're allowed to make. You either can reject the null hypothesis or you cannot reject the null hypothesis. That is all. You can't say, I accept the null hypothesis, I accept the alternative's been proven, none of that stuff. Right? You either are rejecting what you assume to be true or you don't reject what you assume to be true. It doesn't mean that it was right. Right? Because we never are 100% certain of anything. We just know that it's highly likely, right? Like, for example, I can't prove to you Santa Claus doesn't exist. I can just prove that it's very unlikely that he does exist. Sorry if I'm breaking any hearts out there. Okay, so let's think about what this is going to mean for us. With our rigged jury example, there are two decisions that we can make. We can reject the null. That's it. So if we reject the null, it means we're rejecting that the jury was fair, which implies that the evidence is implying to us that the jury was rigged. We don't know it was rigged. We just know that it's likely that it was rigged, right? Or we could not reject the null hypothesis, which means we do not reject that the jury was fair. Doesn't mean that it was fair. It just means I don't have enough evidence to prove it was rigged. And I'm kind of setting you up for something a little bit here. I don't know if you caught that. So when you reject the null, you say the statement in red. Well, you actually say both statements. So when you look at your hypothesis testing cheat sheet, which, hold on. So right here, step 5, we're going to be making decisions. We're going to reject the null. See it? Reject the null. Okay. Step 6, we're going to have to state a conclusion. So when we're here looking at this particular problem, I'm giving you kind of what's going on here. This black part is step 5, where you make that decision to reject. And this part that I'm kind of writing in red is a little preemptive strike on step 6, where you have to write a conclusion. The evidence is showing, or the evidence implies, or there is enough evidence to support, that kind of thing. That's what we're going to say. It doesn't mean that it was. I don't know that the jury was rigged. I just know that the evidence is implying that. The evidence is backing it up. Okay? And same thing with do not reject. That means that the evidence, there's not enough evidence to suggest that the jury was rigged. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. I'm going to flip past the next couple pages. We'll come back to them, don't worry. And I want to talk about writing the conclusion, because what I just said basically leads right into it. So how to write these hypotheses. So that's step 6, that last step. Every time you're going to have to write some kind of conclusion. It says it at the bottom of everything. Look at that inferential statistics cheat sheet. You'll see at the bottom of every single one of them, it says state the conclusion, state the conclusion. So we have to have a very particular way for how these conclusions get stated. And here's what we say. If we reject the null hypothesis, we say there is sufficient evidence, i.e. the evidence is implying to support the statement in the alternative. And you have to write it out in words. And then when you do not reject your null hypothesis, you say, I don't have enough evidence to support that alternative. That's it. Those are your only options. You either supported the alternative or do not support the alternative. Now, step 5 is all about the null hypothesis. You make your decision to reject or not reject the null. But the step 6, the writing part, is actually all about the alternative, because the alternative is what you're trying to prove, right? Because the alternative, you don't need to prove the null. The null was what you assumed, right? So you're trying to prove that alternative. Let's see this example. So again, these were the null and alternative hypotheses for us, that the jury was fair and representative in words, or the jury was rigged. If the judge decides to reject that null hypothesis, reject that the proportion is equal to 0.5, a statistician, i.e. you, because you're a statistics student, will write the conclusion is there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that the jury was rigged, right? Or you could say there's sufficient evidence to support the claim that the proportion of African Americans was too low, or the evidence implies that the jury was rigged. The evidence implies that there were too few African Americans on the panel. Right? Something to that effect. You're writing about the alternative here. The decision's about the null, but you write about the alternative. When you reject the null, it means you're supporting the alternative. By the same token, when you do not reject the null, then there is not sufficient evidence to support that alternative, namely that the jury was rigged, right? Or however you want to say it in words. but you have to say it in English words. You have to write it out in a sentence. And it always has to start with, there is sufficient evidence, there is not sufficient evidence. And that gets to the weirdness of how we speak. We're not going to write, we accept anything, we've proven anything. We never say that, or proven. We haven't proven anything. We just prove that it's very likely. But we don't know for sure. Okay? So we either say there's enough evidence to support or not enough evidence to support the alternative. It's always writing about the alternative in that step 6. Okay? Oh, that's what I was writing down here. Step 5, I'll put it right here. Step 5. Oops, hey, I pressed the wrong button. Step 5 is to reject or not reject the null. But the conclusion, i.e. step 6, is always about the evidence about the alternative. Always writing about the alternative there. It's a weird way to do it, but it has to do with the logic behind what we're doing. You don't have to prove the null because the null was what was assumed to be true. So our conclusions are based on the alternative, which is ostensibly what we were trying to show. Right? And of course, we don't ever show anything 100%. We just show that it's highly likely. All right, I know this video is a short one, but I'm going to stop right there because the rest of the stuff is all based on the same topic, which is errors. So that's where I'm going to pick up next time. I'm going to flip back a couple pages and go back and talk about the errors. So I'll see you then.